Hey y'all, how you doing? I figured I would go ahead and continue my story of my dad's fall and go from there. Um, after he fell and spent 3 weeks at Lewis Gale in Salem, he was transferred to a skilled nursing facility in Lynchburg. So, I got with my dad's sister and, I told her that I would need her to commit to 1 day a week coming out to let me go home and do what I needed to because it was a almost 3-hour drive one way. So I couldn't be making it, in a short amount of time. It had to be an overnight kind of thing. Leave one day and then come back the next. So I was able to get her to commit to it. At the time, Tim was still working at the bookstore, and we were both still taking classes. So the days I would go home would vary depending on whether he could come and get me or if I would have to get my uncle to bring me back home and then have my husband take me back the next day. It was a lot of things that needed to be done, but I was on top of it all and made sure to work everything out that way. Daddy was never alone. Yeah, he was paralyzed, but he could still feel things in his upper body. And after we got to the what's called SNF, SNF, skilled nursing facility, it seemed like every time they were in there to change his bedding or give him a bath or clean him up after a bowel movement or whatever, inevitably every time they had to interact with Dad, they would hurt him. They would roll him over too far and the ventilator in his trach would be pushed up against the railing of the bed and start pushing in the back of his throat. I mean, it was just constantly one thing or another. So from that point on, I had to be intimately involved in every part of my dad's care. If they needed to, change his bedding, give him a bath, anything, then I had to be there helping just to make sure they didn't hurt him because, he couldn't speak loudly, so he couldn't tell them they were hurting him, and he couldn't signal to them because you didn't have enough movement to get their attention. And I mean, I had brought it up to the nursing staff quite a few times about it, and it, they got somewhat better, but it was still not near good enough. And if there was something wrong, then Daddy had no way of letting anybody know, really. The nurses can't spend 24/7 in his room because they have an entire floor of patients to deal with. So, um, you know, he needed somebody by his side 24/7. They wanted to somehow get him to use a call button, but didn't have any hand movement, so therefore he couldn't press a button. And I mean, it was just one thing after another, but I I stayed there. I carried out his wishes, and I treated him the way he deserved to be treated, because he took care of me my whole life. There will never be anybody like him. He was amazing, and he deserved only the best in life. And every minute I was with him, what would go through my mind was, okay, if I were in his situation, what would I want somebody to do for me? Yes, he was paralyzed, but he still had movement in his shoulders, and his neck and shoulders would hurt a lot. So I would, you know, take the time to massage his shoulders when they would get tense and start hurting him, because he didn't have movement. He was retaining fluid a lot in his limbs. So I would, after he would get physical therapy, I would take and rub lotion into his skin. That way it wouldn't get dry and cracked. I'd make sure I brushed his teeth, and, every few days give him a shave. Uh, you know, if his hair started getting long, I'd give him a haircut once he was able to start sitting up in the bed a little more. Just the little things that make you feel human, that you take for granted when everything is fine and normal. So it was those little things that really made a difference for him and kept him feeling human and not feeling forgotten. I would, when I would come home, I would come down here and look at his DirecTV DVR list to find out what shows he watched, what days they were on, and what times and what channels they were on. That way, just because he was in the hospital, he didn't have to miss out on his favorite shows. This way he could he could still enjoy watching what he liked. I mean, he absolutely loved wrestling. He loved it. He had, watched it from the time I was a kid. I grew up watching it with him, and during this time with him, you know, Thursday nights, I think it would be, we'd put it on and we'd sit and watch it together, and then he would go on off to sleep. But it's little things like that a lot of people don't think about. Just because your life has changed does not mean it has to be 100% everything gone. You can have even just tiny bits of normalcy, and that can give you the strength to keep going through the rough times. During the time with my dad at the place in Lynchburg, with me being full-time in school and I had already finished my second semester, and I had signed up to take a few classes for the summertime. I think it was maybe 3 classes. So during that time, I was there with Dad, taking care of him, learning the ins and outs of, how to keep his trach and his feeding tube area clean, keeping an eye on all his medications, just being able to interact with him and know when something wasn't right. Because he was paralyzed, he had to have a catheter, and that having a catheter for a long period of time, you end up getting repeated urinary tract infections. And there were several times that I caught on that he was fighting an infection before the staff did, because I would know something was wrong. I could tell it, and I would tell them to start checking his blood work and start, trying to find out what was wrong. And sure enough, it'd be a urinary tract infection. And, at one point, my dad was on fentanyl patches for his chronic back pain. And he was having pain still, so they increased his dosage on that. And, the one thing my dad was always adamant about was he did not want to be drugged insensible. He would rather hurt than be in a stupor. So after they had increased his patches, he was showing signs of over-medication within, I don't know, a day and a half. And I caught it, and, I ended up basically having to take one of the patches off of him, because the facility wouldn't, because it was doctor's orders that he have these on, and, they couldn't just go against the doctor's orders. They'd have to be rewritten, and a lot of bureaucratic bullshit. So basically I took it it was two patches at different dosages, and I took the one off and never let him put it back on. And he was able to come out of that pretty quickly. But because I was so involved and so attentive, I was able to save his life a few times, because if things had gone the way they were going at the time, if I hadn't found it as quick as I did, then it could have been deadly for Dad. So I had all that going on. I had my schoolwork. I had, I have my own back and neck issues that I had to deal with. My own doctor's appointments I had to get to. Dealing with Crohn's disease along with the other chronic issues I've got. Yeah, I to this day, I don't know how I got through everything. I just did it. I knew what had to be done, and I didn't. And I took my medicine when I could, but I never slept for more than just a little bit, because I was always afraid I would be asleep and Dad would need me. So, my sleep was not great, but I did get sleep at times, and it was enough to keep me going. And the main thing that did keep me going was knowing that if I weren't there, Daddy wouldn't have anybody to look after him, and to take care of him when others were careless. So, excuse me, I didn't think, I just did. And in May, right around the time of Memorial Day, Dad actually got feeling back in his lower body. He didn't get movement, but he got feeling. He could feel people touching his legs, his feet, his not as much feeling on his waist, but he definitely had a lot more feeling in his lower extremities. And that was a hopeful sign that, maybe after all the trauma that his back sustained, that maybe once it healed, things wouldn't be as terrible as we were thinking they would be. That was the hope. Now, insurances will only allow for hospital stays in certain types of facilities for a limited amount of time. The maximum amount of time he was able to be in the skilled nursing facility was 45 days, I believe. And while he was there, it was on me to make sure nobody hurt him. So I was taking care of him. And if my husband texted me or called me and I was in the middle of helping give Dad his bath or change the bedding or whatever else needed to be done, of course I wouldn't stop and answer the phone. My priorities were my dad and taking care of him because he couldn't do it for himself. So my focus was on him. And, after everything would be done with him, then I would get a hold of my husband and, call him back. And at one point, I didn't answer a text and a call that my husband had sent because I was in the middle of working with Dad. So when I was done, I went ahead and called him back. And he immediately started yelling at me. Why didn't I pick up the phone? Why didn't I answer immediately? What took me so long to get back to him? It's been an hour. Or, just yada yada bullshit coming out his mouth. And I told him, I said, I was, sorry. I was doing what I needed to with Dad and taking care of his needs. So, of course, I didn't answer. And my husband told me on the phone, he said, well, if I call or text you, you better drop what you're doing and answer me immediately. And I took a deep breath and I said, you can just fucking kiss my ass. I ain't got time for your bullshit. Fuck off. And I hung up on him. And from that right there was pretty much the end of my marriage, even though we stayed together another 4 years. That was the beginning of the end of our marriage. Tim knew some people through the bookstore that dealt with the health department codes for nursing homes and such. And, he had been talking to them about, Dad's situation, and they told Tim that, there's one place under no circumstances ever allow someone you love to go to this place. And we're like, okay, no problem. So we were getting on to the end of his time to be able to stay at the skilled facility and then have to go to a nursing home. So we were trying to find a place that could handle the feeding tube and the ventilator. Now, in Virginia, this side of Richmond, there were 3 facilities that dealt with ventilator patients. 2 of them I was able to go to, and calling them shitholes was an insult to a shithole. That's how bad they were. Some of the rooms actually had holes in the walls underneath the air conditioner that would be in the window. And then we were working with the facility to see if maybe we could get Dad into a place in North Carolina or maybe even over in West Virginia. But we kept running into issues because of insurance. So he had to stay in state. And unless he wanted to go to Virginia Beach, which he didn't, that left us one place we could go. And it was the one that we were told to never take a family member to. And it was in Roanoke. The first time I walked in the place, as I was going down to check on the rooms, because Dad was quote unquote guaranteed his own room, is what we were promised. When we reached out, they said he would have his own room. And so I went over the place because this was it. We literally had no other option but this place. And when I walked into that place, one of the residents came up and asked me, he looked at me and he's like, "How the hell can I get out of here?" Yeah, that doesn't bode well for anything. That was one of their, long-term residents asking me how the hell he could get out. So yeah, that didn't inspire a lot of confidence. And then the day Daddy got transferred, because Dad needed more checkups and more care, instead of putting him in a private room, they put him in a ward that was near the nurse's station, and it was a room that had 6 beds in it. And at least 3 of the other beds were occupied. So there was no privacy, no nothing. I pitched a fit, Dad pitched fit, and they're like, "Oh, well, because he needs the care, we got to have him close to the nurse's desk." And I mean, it's typical bureaucratic bullshit again. But what really made it bad is when they got Dad to that facility, they didn't even have a bed that could accommodate him. Not just the fact that he was paralyzed, but the fact that he was bigger than their normal size beds. So when they got him onto one of their beds and they were trying to get him situated on it, the damn thing broke while he was on it, and it slammed him backwards and caused him more pain. And then the stupid idiots, while Dad was on the bed, get under the bed to keep trying to fix it. The place, I would never send my most hated person's dead dog to. I would not send it to that place. It was the one place I was not allowed to stay overnight. Luckily, my cousin Joyce lived not far from where Dad was at. So she was gracious enough to let me stay with her overnight, and then I would either take the bus or taxi to Dad in the morning, and she would pick me up in the evening and take me to her house. And she worked nights, so I would be at the house alone in the evenings, and then, while I was up with Dad, she'd be sleeping. And we spent almost 7 weeks in that fucking hellhole. Once, excuse me, once the facility got the proper bed and mattress, it got a little bit better for Dad. The mattress would automatically fill different parts of it with air to, keep pressure sores from forming as much. But along with that, he was also supposed to be physically adjusted every 2 hours so he didn't get bed sores. And because I was not allowed to stay, before I'd leave, I would give the shift their, reminder to reposition him every 2 hours, and I'd leave his list of, TV shows on, so, they could come in and, all they'd have to do is change the TV channel. That would be it. It wasn't hard to do something like that. But then when I'd come back the next morning, Dad would be in the exact same position as I left him. And after I left, they'd give him his bedtime meds, and then they'd just do nothing. It didn't matter what. They just ignored him. And there wasn't a fucking thing I could do. Now we were sent to this place so we could get Dad weaned off the ventilator and also work on his swallowing so he could also get the feeding tube out. That was what was supposed to be done there. Couple days after Dad got there, the doctor came in and talked to him, and she looked at him point blank without even running any tests or knowing much of anything. She looked at him and said, "Oh, you'll be on the ventilator for the rest of your life." And Dad and I both looked at each other and looked at her and said, "That's bullshit." So we started, it was a fight, but we did get them to start doing the swallow. They did a swallow test and started helping him get used to coming off the feeding tube and actually, water chips, and, he loved it when he got his coffee. He missed having his coffee, I'll tell you. And he was making fairly good progress there. But every time we tried getting him off the ventilator, the facility just would not work with us. Not at all. So, you know, I talked to the staff about it, told them what our expectations were, what we expected to happen, and we gave it a couple weeks. Nobody tried doing anything. So, finally, after Daddy and I talked, I went into the head of the respiratory department's office and I said, look, if you all aren't going to seriously start weaning him off the ventilator, then we want it shut off. Pull the plug, turn the damn thing off. Daddy'll live or die. We're done with this crap of being on it as it is. And let me tell you, that got their attention. After that, at first they said they couldn't allow us to unplug the ventilator because it was against policy or more bullshit. But they said if we took him home and then did that, then that would be fine. But it eventually did not have to go that way because after that threat, they actually did start seriously weaning him off the ventilator. And they were definitely increasing his amount of intake he could eat. So things, by the end of his stay in that shithole, we had finally started making progress. And thank God for that. It only took a threat of pulling the plug and letting him die on it, which, that was Daddy's decision as well. And I agreed wholeheartedly because he and I both knew he could breathe just fine. He didn't need that damn thing any longer. So it was useless to stay on it. So, by the mid-July, we were finally seeing things heading into the right direction. Getting off the ventilator, or working to get off the ventilator and, working on eating. So, that was about 7 weeks of pure hell in a place called Avante of Roanoke. And I'm telling you this point blank, don't send a dead animal there that you care about. Nobody deserves to be treated the way those people treat people. At all. On that note, I'm going to end this. And I will pick up where I left off next time. So, y'all have a good night. Blessed be. I thank you for watching this. And y'all have all my love. So good night.